All right. Look, that said, in the interest of time, let's kick it off. So, hi everyone, and welcome to IGEA's Key Game Data webinar with Video Game Insights, aka VGI. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the country in which we meet. Today, we come to you from the land of the Komamari saltwater people of the Ugamba language region, and I invite you to think on whose land you're residing on. Sovereignty was never ceded, and as the lands have always been and always will be Aboriginal land. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend welcome to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So what are we doing here? So far, more than 15,000 games have been released on Steam. That's a new record. And in an age of really excessive supply, access to good data is crucial. It helps with discoverability, it helps with market fit for original IP, and it is a decisive factor for future developments, marketing strategies, and content updates. VGI recently released the Indie Market Games Report, which offers an in-depth analysis of the indie game landscape, including key data on market growth, top-performing games, and trends shaping the future of indie gaming. And today, Vic from VGI will dive somewhat into these insights and demonstrate how to leverage their platform to meet your needs. Best of all, I had to go there. A 20% discount applies to IGEA members who sign up for the business tier of VGI between now and the end of the month. That said, if you don't want to sign up for the business tier, they also have an indie tier, which is actually very, very affordable given the fantastic service this platform offers. Before I hand over to Vic, a little bit of housekeeping. Like I said, please mute yourself and turn the video off while Vic is presenting, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Vic would like this to be as interactive as possible. In that case, either unmute yourself or put the questions in the chat. I will be monitoring them and pass them on to Vic. So that's it, Vic, over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that wonderful intro, Jens. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who is listening into this early morning, late afternoon webinar. So as Jens stated, the name is Vic Bassi. I am head of biz dev at Video Game Insights. We specialize in, basically market data, competitive intelligence, and player insights. And we've been around for about 4 years at this point. So what I will do very quickly is present a very, very brief overview of what we do for anyone who is uninitiated on what VGI is. And then I will give you a quick tour of the platform. And please feel free to chime in at any time. As Jens stated, it'd be great to have this as interactive as possible with any questions you might have on data, on the state of the industry, essentially. I want this to be as open and freeform as possible. So what I will do very quickly is, as I said, quickly share. Hopefully technology works, and here we go. Hopefully you can see my screen. Excellent. Right. So as a platform, as I said, we focus on market data, but I think our strength, apart from the accuracy of our data, is the range of features that we have. So we have full coverage of every game that has ever been released on Steam, historical data going back to pre-2014, a robust database of developers and publishers from all across the world. Essentially, if you've put a game up on Steam, we have it on our database. We track a range of metrics, have a wonderful selection of filters, everything that you will need, and continuously update the platform with new features every time. So you're able to track and see wishlist, a feature that we started featuring from March of this year. You can see MAU, DAO, CCU data. We have country and regional breakdown. Essentially what I'm saying is it's pretty good, but I would say that, of course. When you look at our differentiators, as I said, is global coverage, and we're quite competitive. For anyone who's tried to go into the market to access data of any kinds, you can probably share your experiences of just how costly that can be. At a base level, from the indie tier, even with our business subscription, we are quite competitive. And that's by design. We're a relatively small, lean team, and we focus on the accuracy of everything that we do. And whilst we're well known for Steam at this point, we're currently rolling out console data. So you can expect to see the likes of PlayStation and Xbox sooner rather than later. That's the presentation point here. There are little insights as to some of the partners that we currently work with, and that list is growing. So, we have wonderful testimonials from a lot of these companies that continuously use and trust us, which I think is a good thing. So before I move on into a demo of the platform, is there anyone who has any initial questions? Especially since we released a report prior to this webinar. I'm hoping most people have had a chance to look at it, review it, have thoughts. If so, let me know, and we can start answering some questions before I showcase the platform. No, it's eerily quiet. Then I will move on to showcasing the platform. Excellent. So as Jens pointed out, Steam, as we know, is a juggernaut of a platform. There are, as of this time, over 15,000 games that have been released on the platform, and that number continues to grow. We know that for anyone who is releasing a game on Steam, it is much more than having a good game. Visibility is a challenge for most. Engagement is an even bigger bone of contention for others. So, it is important to understand what the competitive landscape is, and this is one of the things that we bring to the table. When it comes to seeing what the top games are as a feature, we have this amazing top charts. So as you can see here, if you want to see the top performing games over the last week, in terms of units, in terms of revenue, you have this amazing chart here where you can also download as a picture, or you can download the entire chart as an Excel. And we can see there are some big hitters here. Dragon Age: The Veiled God has been the standout performer over the last week since its release. Planet Coaster, as we see, is doing quite well. And then you've got some mainstays of the last year. Black Myth Wukong, Warhammer, Baldur's Gate continues to excel. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to go a little deeper into one of those. Let's take a look at Black Myth, for example. So Black Myth, as we know, Chinese developed game, a studio that has kind of cut its teeth working on smaller titles until they essentially put all their eggs in making their first big budget PC release. It's paid off. As you can see from the numbers, so far, it shifted almost 22 million units on Steam. It's a game that has really established the studio as a big player in this field. And for the Chinese development scene, it has been warmly received back in China, where, as you can see, 74% of the players are from China. What's really intriguing about this number is that number was initially higher as more and more players from the West have understood and bought into the level of hype, interest, and critical acclaim the game has reached. It has carved into the initial number from China, but it is a game essentially that has done quite well. This also presents me a chance to showcase some of the features that we have. So when you're looking at some of the data, we can see that Asia is the dominant region when it comes to the players by region. Time spent playing, you have a lot of people, 47% who have spent 40 to 100 hours in this game. That is testament to the quality of the game, and a really interesting metric for what is essentially a single player game. You know, this isn't live service. And when you look up at the active players, there are still people consistently playing. I mean, even the daily active users is impressively high. And from a player sentiment, it is really, really doing well. Let's go a little further down. You can see some of the historical data here, which if we look at accumulative estimated sales, we know it's been doing quite well. You can see it started off quite strongly and has maintained that trajectory consistently. Really impressive, and it's definitely the big seller of the year so far. This gives me a chance to dive into one of the newer features that we have here. So, assuming you're a studio or a publisher, and before I go on, does anyone have any questions on what I've showcased so far before I move on? I'm not seeing any movement. No? Okay. So it gives me a chance to dive into one of our relatively new features called player overlap. So player overlap is intriguing. So if you're a studio, a publisher, and we assume you're someone who is intrigued by the success of this game, thinking, okay, is this the first time a game from that region of that ilk has come and sold quite well on Steam? Be it, focused to the Chinese demographic, or to, just has certain sensibilities in terms of gameplay, in terms of setting, that does really well. The player overlap showcases that data. Essentially, we look at what other games Black Myth owner, Wukong owners have in their Steam library, and through a percentage or an index are able to see the games that they're also playing at the moment. So if we click on the overlap index, as you can see with the tooltip there, 0.5 would be half as likely, and 2.0 will be twice as likely for them to have this game in their Steam library. So Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, as we see, is at the very top. What is really intriguing about this is we can also see just on average median time how much they have spent playing these games. Now, you might think, yes, there seems to be a correlation with that, but this is a unique tool because it showcases games you might not be aware of, like this title, which I'm not even going to try and and talk up or pronounce. But if we click on this, you can dive down a really deep hole, learning about the performance of this game. We see it's a game that was only localized to Chinese, specifically for that audience. It sold over 200,000 units. It has pretty decent concurrent considering it came out earlier this year, April 18th. Currently has a discount. And in terms of the country segmentation, 82% from China. You can also see it's done really well in Hong Kong, relatively speaking. It has some buyers in the United States. And one could even make the argument most of the players who buy into this might not fully grasp the language, but they appreciate the gameplay. And that is the value of that tool, the ability to really dive deeper, learn more about a player ecosystem, and in some cases find some nuggets that you might not be aware of. Are there any other questions before I continue? No? Okay. I thought we'd look at an oldie, 2 years old at this point. In gaming terms, that feels like an oldie, but it also gives me an opportunity to tease the integration of our PlayStation data. As you can see right here at the top right, this is one of the newer games that is slowly incorporating some of the PlayStation data that we have. So if I click here, you're able to see some numbers. It's still in early stages. We haven't fully rolled this out, but eventually, when this is fully formed, you'll be able to see a lot of comparative data to what we have for Steam. But looking at Steam, Elden Ring, as we know, has done phenomenally well. Is there a question in the chat? Yes, we have a question here from Blake. I'm curious if the overlap uses user-generated tags to determine overlap. If so, does the overlap update as the tags update? That's interesting. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to dive into the specifics of the methodology of how it works. I would be happy to engage on that on a separate session if that works for you. Mainly because my colleague and co-founder, as I said, we're a very small team, is much more well-versed when it comes to the feature and methodology of how, overlap works.
Nick, I'm on the call actually, so I can jump in if you want.
Wonderful call. Thanks.
Hey everyone. Yes, this is a good question and allows me to talk a little bit about the methodology. And this is a methodology that we use more broadly as well. We actually look at a very large sample size of public player profiles on a daily basis. So we don't necessarily use the tags of the games to use the overlap. We actually look at actual people and their Steam libraries as well as what they're wishlisted. And we can tell which people have those two games in their library and therefore count them as overlap. So it looks at roughly 1 million players on a daily basis and looks at their Steam library overlaps. Hope that helps.
Wonderful. And then we had a special guest jump in just for that question. Hopefully more surprises like that later on. So please keep the questions coming, especially knowing that we have Carl here who can chime in if and when needed. So with that said, I wanted to showcase something similar with Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate as well. Those are two big games that continue to feature in Steam's top charts. And again, the numbers are so impressive. 14.2 million units sold. We all know Elden Ring has been really a landmark title of the last couple of years. It's also cool to check out the player base. It's quite well-rounded when you see it. Shows the global appeal of the game. And when you look by country, China, again, showcases itself as a very, very big and increasingly critical market for anyone looking to make a dent commercially. I wanted to go into the player overlap data just to show like the differences. So if I click on the overlap index, similar games feature up there. It's a Souls-like, so you have your run-of-the-mill Lords of the Fallen, Lies of P, which was a big hit last year. Wo Long features as well. The Messia, which is an indie-style version of those kind of games. And as you can see, the further down you go, you're able to find relatively newer games aligned to this. Let's take a look at one more title, Baldur's Gate. Massive, another massive seller. Still hugely popular with impressive daily and monthly active users. The player segmentation shows, again, China featuring prominently, as is the United States, which you expect. It's a game that continues to make really impressive numbers. The player overlap, also really cool. We click on the index here. You see Dragon Age features prominently. It's a game that's been mentioned in similar circles to what Baldur's Gate did. It's a fantasy RPG. But you also find similar titles incorporating some elements of what Baldur's Gate offered, from Solasta, Warhammer, Tactical Breach Wizards from earlier this year, Tactics Ogre, and a bunch more. And if you go a little further down, I'm sure you will see relatively new titles you probably hadn't considered as comparative titles there. So if there are no questions, I will move on into talking about our database, which I hinted at earlier on was quite robust. Okay. So when it comes to our games database, it has almost 129,000 games here. And the historical data aspect of it is arguably our most impressive features. As you can see sales pre-2014 and so on. But what is great about this, as I said, all this data is something you can download as an Excel, and you can segment it. So if we were to use a test case here, you can also create custom lists. But if I wanted to look at sports games and the top performing sports games of the last years in terms of revenue, you can see that here. It also features new free games. And yeah, it's pretty robust. You can search based on themes, single player component, tags, of which, as we know on Steam, there are a heck of a lot of those, and even segmented into publisher classification. So if you wanted to see sports games only from indies, then you would come up with a bunch of really interesting titles. Russian Fishing 4 apparently is hugely popular. Fall Guys features, even though they've been acquired at this point, if I recall. Skater XL, the pretender to the Skate series, also features there. When we look at our developer database, over 80,000 developers here. It gives a really, really intriguing insight into specific ecosystems. I thought I would look at one, Australia, for example. And when we click on that, we can see the developers who, stand out based on total revenue. We see Team Cherry with the Hollow Knight games, even with the one game they have feature fairly prominently on this. And what's really intriguing about this feature is you can go into each specific studio. So if I click on Beam Team, hopefully no one from Beam Team is here. Don't hate us. It's probably the wrong option to select, but this is a studio with one developed game. You can see when they first released the game. They've released a singular game. You can dive down and learn more about the specific game, its performance in relation to the studio. So if I clicked Unstranded Deep, you can gain a little deeper into the performance of that game and so on. The same feature exists from a publisher perspective. So we have a equally robust data where you can segment by country, and there are a lot of countries here you can look at. If we looked at the United States, which is one of the bigger markets, you would see the usual suspects feature. What if we looked at Devolver Digital? They have a massive catalog, 142 games, 9 in development. And you get a sense of the genre specification they focus on. Adventure titles, 70 of the games they've released feature in that, with action being another key segment they focus on. Casual also features. In terms of the historical data of the platform as a whole, that's loading up because they have a lot of games. You can see the performance of releases they have had in recent years. Inscription has been one of their bigger hits. As a publisher that doesn't have an awful lot of live service options, you can see the value of investing in relatively small teams, backing them with a solid marketing plan, and seeing how they do. And this is a really good way, again, to use the combination of different features that we have to learn more about a specific player mindset, a gaming ecosystem, and more. So if we looked at Inscription, you can see it's a game that still remains quite popular, and critically was well received. I think I've chewed most of your ear out at this point. Are there any questions?
I mean, if there aren't any questions, maybe I could just take this opportunity to ask one myself. So if, let's say you're an indie developer and you're working on your first game, or maybe you're working on your follow-up game, you're like, man, I really wonder if this concept is going to fit into the market. Is this actually going to make me some money? Are people going to play it? What are some of the steps that a small studio can take to gain the confidence that what they're working on is likely to be a commercial success?
Yes, that's a great question, Jens. There are a few. I mean, as we know, game releases and game development isn't an exact science. There's only so much you can do, but there's a lot of volatility in the industry. So you will need to try and validate pretty much everything that you might want to do at some point. So there are a number of ways, especially here. We have some indie tools here. In terms of pricing, revenue calculator, unit sales estimation that exists for you. However, I want to focus on the competitive insights specifically. So if you are on the larger end of the scale when it comes to budgets and you wanted to understand some of the bigger games that have been released over the past year, and to get a sense of their performance, and I'm assuming the game that you're making obviously fits all the elements of these games here. Manor Lords. What else can I take over the last few years? Did I put Power World? Yeah. Yeah, let's just focus on these. So the beauty of this feature is you can compare up to 15 games. This is a great way. If I remove the early access period and I align to release here, where we move them back to, assuming they all released on basically day one, you can compare a number of different things with this feature. You can look at their pricing strategy through here. We can see Baldur's Gate 60 had no real desire to go into sales, to offer discounts. But the longer it goes, and I think you can glean a lot from the type of games, right? So you can learn a lot by the pricing strategy. Baldur's Gate, quite high, had no real inclination to drop its price in the first year. Why? Because it was selling quite well. It's a game that has done very, very well. So if you were making game of that scale, you can compare with other titles within that space to see if and why. Manor Lords is unique because it's an early access game. It's still in early access. So what we're seeing here is it's had relatively lower prices, but as they add new features, they can increase the SRP ahead of potentially full launch. Power World started with a discount until it went into version 1.0. And what's been interesting is as its concurrents have dropped, it is sought to regain players back by going slightly deeper, and so on and so forth. So, you can look at specific franchises. For example, if I were to look at the Battlefield series, so 5, 1, 2042, for there. So this is a completely different example. The pricing strategy is slightly different. And these are older games as well. So you can go historically all the way back, because you're aligned to release, to compare and contrast how and why they opted to go in the direction they did. You can look at the cumulative performance in terms of revenue, for example. We can see Battlefield 2042 has done better than more recent Battlefield titles, at least on Steam. What will be great is when we're able to have this and compare with the consoles as well, PlayStation. So when people say, oh, Battlefield is doing quite well, I'm pretty sure there are a bunch of indie studios around the world who would be happy with this level of poor performance. You can see the max concurrence, of which, again, Battlefield has done quite well, but Battlefield 5 had a much higher peak, much later in its life cycle. You can see monthly. Basically, there is a lot of data which, if you are at a base level unsure of how to navigate a space, you're working on an indie title, you're thinking to yourself, I don't know even where to begin. This is a powerful tool. I'll give you one more example using specifically indie titles. Let's look at 2D platformers, a specific kind. Inside. Limbo. Planet of Lana. What else? I'm pretty sure there's another one, but Little Nightmares. 1 and 2. So these are comparative titles aesthetically. And if we look at their cumulative estimated revenue, Planet of Lana, as you can see, is still relatively new. So there isn't a lot of historical data to go by. But we can see Inside started off and has done quite well. But Limbo, because of its longevity, continues to sell quite well. It was the benchmark for games of that segment, of that subgenre. It basically established a subgenre of its own, and continues to do quite well. It is evergreen. Inside is also great, but the Little Nightmares franchise has also done impressively well. You can glean a little bit more into their pricing strategies. If I go into year one, what I find interesting about this is you can see there's a base level in terms of pricing for games within this segment. It's around $19.99, $20. But Little Nightmares 2 decided to go big following the success of Little Nightmares 1, where they felt we have an established player base, a fan base here. We can afford to take bigger risks in terms of our pricing strategy, which as you can see is evident here. What is really interesting is at some point within the first year, they realized maybe it was too high. And so they started to offer huge discounts in line with the standard retail price of what the other titles were. And that has been the trend going forward. So there are a lot of ways you can use this tool. I see there are a flurry of questions coming in. Let me.
We do have a couple of questions, and it's probably worth repeating those because if anyone is watching this in the recording, they may not necessarily check the chat. Carl has answered some of these, and by the way, in case you're wondering, why have we mentioned Carl, given that he's one of the co-founders? Well, two reasons. One, he's based in the UK and had to get up really, really early, and also he is apparently sick. So, Carl, thank you very much for making yourself available. Don't exhaust yourself too much and keep your fluids up. But the questions were, can we filter for virtual reality titles? That was one question from Chess.
Yes, and Carl's response was, good question. You can filter by VL Steam tag right now, but we're adding a proper separate VL filter soon as well. Yes, as I mentioned earlier on, the platform is fairly fluid. We are updating based on feedback from clients and anyone who uses the platform. So no feedback, no feature option is too small or too big.
Excellent. And the other question was the differentiation between early access and full releases. And yes, that is something that you're doing as well. So you can filter by both. And then John was asking, given that indie games tend to perform best on Switch, do you have any data coming for that platform?
At this stage, no. We actually have a roadmap which I will bring on screen, which as I said changes over time. But as you can see there, Q4, it's all about PlayStation and Xbox at this point. No immediate plans for Nintendo because, as you can understand, it is a much more challenging ecosystem to break into. But it's something we're always open to.
Fair enough. All right, well, we'll put that in your to-do book. I mean, one thing I was wondering as well. So you're an indie developer. You now had a look like, okay, I think my game is going to work. We have an idea how it's going to compete. We have an idea for pricing. How can this platform assist you with finding a publisher? Given that, not every publisher, for example, wants to publish every game. They may have a certain focus. Some of them are a bit more driven towards narrative games. Others are more focused on quirky indies. We've looked at Devolver before. Can you walk us through some of the steps that can help you identify a publisher so that when you reach out, you actually are talking to the right people?
That is such a perfectly timed question because let's be honest, considering the state of the industry right now, we're all looking for funding at some point, right? Somewhere. Yeah, this leads me back to the publisher database that we have. So as a result of the way we've segmented this feature, you can actually segment the publishers based on specific genres. So if they specialize, you're making a game that is maybe a casual game, and maybe there is a publisher with a certain threshold or specialization, because ultimately funding is one thing, but you want them to have the expertise to be able to market the game, that they have experience of what you want. So let's go with MMO simply because it's a wild punt. Who are the publishers who specialize in that field? And if you are unsure, we have on the right side the number of titles and areas, the percentage basically breakdown of genres that they have released titles in. So you also can go in and look and go, 100% here. They seem to be well versed when it comes to MMO. Who is that? Well, it turns out it's a studio called Studio Wildcard. Let's click on them. They're based out of the States. You can see some of the publishers they've worked with. See the overall performance. They're relatively new, but then you realize why. They focused on one specific game, their bread and butter, the Arc series. So with that said, knowing what you know about this publisher, you're making an MMO, would it be viable for you to present them with something new to break up their focus on their core business, or opt for another publisher? It depends, I guess, on the viability of your game project and its concept, especially if it's very much aligned to what Arc has been over time. Yeah, I mean, using this database, essentially, you can do so much. You might think to yourself, because of the time difference, I want a publisher who understands the nuances of working with a studio in a completely different time zone. Then you can filter as well based on the headquarters, based on a number of different ways. You might think to yourself, what's the minimum revenue they've generated? You can search there. Basically,
can I jump in, Vic, and add a couple of other thoughts that I have here?
Yeah.
Because if you talk about indie developers and looking for indie publishers, we have a couple of filters here that are super relevant, right? The percentage indie, I think you can mess around with that and put in at least, let's say, 10 or 20% of the titles that they've published are indie titles. So you're ruling out the publishers that are, traditionally, AAA only. And you can only also put in some stuff in the in-house percentage. The in-house essentially says, are they just self-publishing their own games, or do they also do third-party publishing? So you can put max as, let's say, 90% or something to make sure that they do at least some third-party publishing. And that already starts to narrow down that list of publishers that you want to get access to. And then if you add things like, hey, I want them to have released at least, let's say, 5 games previously to make sure that they know what they're doing. You might want to release games, not unreleased. And maybe even have a publisher classification as indie as well, if to remove the kind of, but I think we've already kind of done that. Suddenly you're left with, rather than going through like 40,000 names, right? You're left with like only 1,000. But that's where what you were about to talk about in HQ country, I think, comes in. Sorry to just jump in.
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah, so I mean, the filtering options we have is, as I said, probably an invaluable tool for you. But it comes down to also knowing the product that you're developing, the game you're developing, the concept, and potentially your target audience, because that in turn helps you filter your search for who you think makes sense for it. And, you know, as someone who's also had experience from the publisher side, sometimes you get some truly wild concepts that might not be aligned with your current strategy as a publisher at that time. And this is a tool that makes sure, you know, when you're wildly sending out your pitch decks out there, that it is at least close to what who you're targeting, and that they will be a lot more receptive to it.
Yeah, and that was also the background to the question. I mean, I remember someone once liking dealing with a publisher, like you know, it's like a romantic walk on the beach. Like there's got to be a fit, right? Like you're gonna be compatible. And I thought that was a great metaphor. So you know, you just want to randomly reach out to people, but you know, have a very targeted approach. Um, do we have any more questions? So maybe while you think about some more, there's one thing I was wondering, and I know it's a very, very big question, and you know, not sure if you have the perfect answer, but you know, we talked about how there were 15,000 games or more than 50,000 games released on Steam this year. What do you have some advice for discoverability? Is there anything that in your data that's in sort of help with that? You know, given that that is one of the major challenges within this excess of supply.
I mean, discoverability is a huge challenge for everyone. I mean, even the more established publishers who've been seasoned in this space, there's no guarantee of success. At a base level, your game needs to be good, but then again, who knows what the players really like. But Steam is unique because it gives you just about every tool you will need, right, to really stand out if you know how to kind of game the backend system. Tags is a really, really good one in terms of application. And now we're talking about the platform itself, less from a VGI perspective. Tags is a really good way, aligning yourself with similar games, being very open to collaboration with other games within this specific genre to aid visibility. You will probably see there are a number of games with bundles or having demos that are similarly aligned, working together. Is trying to get as many eyes as possible on your game. Because again, you can't escape the fact that Steam as a platform is massive. Over 15,000 games released. In terms of units sold, we see that it has maintained the same level over time. Who are those online? There are players online right now. It is huge. So the potential for you is there. We know the number of people who are creating new accounts continues to grow, aided by the fact that the likes of Ubisoft has scrapped their own platform. Others are realizing, hey, we've tried and we failed to take market share from Steam. Steam is a monopoly, to be honest. And so understanding the value of making a big splash, looking at much more established games on the top charts. What is it they did really well? And I would always say, look at the performance of relatively smaller games, even though they have done quite well. One of the better examples is Satisfactory. This is a game that was released in early access, and I will know they're a Swedish outfit here. Early access, and was in early access for 4 years. They worked, they refined their game, they tweaked their price almost religiously all the time. Listen to player feedback. And again, I know this is a unique example because it's a specific target group, subgenre, a very, very loyal niche segment of the industry. But they found ways, even changing the key art on the game. This was tweaked multiple times over the release of this game because you have to try, iterate, because there is not a one fix. And I think going in and looking at similar examples like this gives you an understanding of what works, what doesn't work. And that's the value of data, right? Because we can only do so much, on our own, but you need to back it up with what has been proven to work. And in some cases, what has proven to not work. So trial and error, backing it up with as much data as possible is what I'd say.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Because otherwise, I'll just keep talking and asking questions myself. But one of them comes to mind is: do you have any data that shows possibly a correlation between the timing of release and success? For example, I don't know, if you have a 2D action platformer, release it on a Friday afternoon because that's when people are, tend to play these games. A bit hyperbolic, but you know what I mean. Is there sort of anything that can help people strategize?
I mean, it's the value of the historical data we have here, right? So you can see
I actually have a perfect slide to answer that question, if you don't mind me jumping. I'm sorry I keep doing this. This is
no, please. That's why you're here.
But we did do a presentation on that very recently. Let's see.
I might have the presentation.
And you see this? Can you see my screen? No? Yes. Okay. So the left-hand side of this talks about exactly what you're asking. Essentially, it looks at what was the month of launch for games, and it compares two types of games: indie games that have sold more than 200,000 units, and indie games that have sold less than 10,000 units. And if you look at when the games were launched for games that didn't end up performing that well, distribution across months is pretty even. They release just pretty much whenever the game is ready. And then you start looking at the bigger games, the games that perform better, you can see that actually May, June, July, very little happens, very little releases happen, right? And suddenly August, September, October are the peaks, and that's where a lot of the stuff comes in. Now, it's a double-edged sword. There's a reason why successful games tend to more often launch in that period, right? That's because if you do it in August or September, you can do your first promo during Black Friday, you can do your second promo during holidays, and like it works really well in terms of maximizing the most critical launch part of your game's success. It also means that you're competing with everyone else who wants to do the same thing. And really, if you start looking at the how much does it actually matter which month you release in, or even which day you release in, the data is pretty inconclusive. I wouldn't worry about it too much. There are arguments to be made that some months are better, but these also tend to be already busier months because more people realize that these months are better. The one interesting thing that I would highlight, though, that might be an opportunity is when we started looking at really big games, games that have sold more than 1 million units, suddenly March dropped to pretty much zero. There are no big games released in March, and I could not figure out why that is the case until someone told me that that's the end of financial year for a lot of big companies. Nobody wants to release an unknown, how well will it perform for the last month of the year, because they would rather put it in next year's fiscal budget, right? And that, I think, is one of the biggest opportunities you can have potentially as an indie developer, because that means that it's very rare to see massive competition in March, um, because of like no real reasons, right? It's a made up reason. March isn't a bad month to release for any other reason but, some fiscal operational stuff. So actually could be something interesting to think about. But yeah, in terms of actual release days, doesn't make too much of a difference. I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, that is super interesting, and not something that would have come to my mind immediately. I mean, more so as the Australian financial year goes until July. So
Right.
there you go. If you are an Australian company, you may want to consider March for the simple fact that other financial years run on a different basis. Do you have any more questions, thoughts, comments? Blake is asking, when doing competitor analysis, I often want to get examples across a range of successes in the genre/tags I'm interested in. Would this involve just sorting by estimated revenue and scrolling through?
This involved just sorting by estimated revenue and scrolling through. I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So if I understand correctly, Blake, what you're saying is, um, okay. So if we were, for example, to go to our top charts, right? And you wanted to say you were looking at a game made set in the 1980s, specifically. I'm not sure there's an awful lot of those. Or have an 80s aesthetic, then yes, you would have, a list. I assume there would be multiple tags that you wanted to include, like the type of genre and performance, but you can do that here. And yes, it might require some manual scrolling depending on what you were looking for, but you could also download all of this and filter at your leisure, however you want. So yes, this is something I think you could do, if I understand your question correctly.
Blake, that's okay, great. Thank you. Otherwise, feel also free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly if there's any misunderstanding in the chat. All right, do we have any more questions? No questions, just want to say thank you. Well, Alex, thank you for coming along. That's much appreciated. Yeah, we also very heavily accept compliments if you want to keep those going. But looking at the time, we have about 5 minutes or so left. So if you do have any further questions, please let us know. In the meantime, Carl, the example of the March release thing, that was super interesting. Did you have any sort of more of these completely unexpected nuggets of knowledge where like, well, we've had a look and we found this and that was really mind-blowing. Do you have any, more of those examples? Any anecdotes that you can share? Was there anything in your report, in your report where like that was really surprising?
I can throw a couple of things out there, unless Vic, you wanna have a different direction here. But there's a couple of things that I think are interesting to talk about. Let me share my screen again. It's part of the analysis we did for the indie report, but we haven't actually released a lot of this data yet. We've done some talks on those things in different places. But the one thing that I want to talk about is how experience matters and don't give up. And I think that's part of the indie report as well. It's like second games, third games, they do tend to perform better. So studios that have released games before tend to do better than studios who haven't released games before. And I think people keep talking about this, but it hasn't been really shown in data properly. But it is pretty conclusive that experience matters, and not just experience in terms of how many years you've done game development, but how many years you've worked together as a team, right? And how you've figured out like, okay, we've done this, we've gone through the hell of developing a game together once before, and then the second time you know which mistakes not to make, right? And It does make a big difference, and you can see that in data. And then the other thing that I wanted to show, because I think I've heard a lot more debate around wish lists, do we even care about them these days? Seems like the value of them has diminished a lot. And what I've done here is I've looked at a bunch of indie games released in 2024, looked at their first month units sold on the y-axis here, and how many wish lists they had at launch in the x-axis here. And you can very clearly tell that there is a pretty solid correlation between wish lists and first month sales, right? It is not 100% correlation. It's not the only thing in the world that matters, but building up wish list pre-launch is still super important and relevant. And directionally, it will give you that boost that you need. Not only just because wish lists really lead to conversion, but because that initial attention of the game leads to better detection by algorithms on Steam, so you get more visibility on top of that, and it becomes like a snowball effect, right? So it does matter. That's the one of the kind of takeaways that I get asked a lot, and people kind of keep saying now that wish lists aren't important anymore. They absolutely are. I think there are things like if you have a free-to-play game, then actually followers might be more important to look at than wish lists, which is an interesting insight. But if you have your traditional, premium game, especially in the end, you're trying to sell on Steam, then there are only so many things that then can give you an edge in terms of discoverability of your game, and building up that community is super important. We just talked to someone yesterday who said actually, your Discord numbers matter more than wishlist numbers. That may be also true, right? Like it all comes down to like the overall community building, and like that is such an important part that Jens asked about it before as well, but I think that is probably the key factor that you can do in order to kind of win the discoverability game.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you very much. And also the fact that there are no overnight successes, right? And we've seen this in Australia as well. I guess one of the best known titles to come out of Australia in the last couple of years is Cult of the Lamb. That definitely wasn't Massive Monster's first game. They've been in the trenches, and so that was the result of long and hard work. All right, well, looking at the time, we may have time for one more brief question. So here is your very last chance.
Alternatively, if you don't have any questions, reach out to us at any time. As we pointed out, there's a stand-in 20% discount for anyone who wants to sign up. And we love to talk about data. Carl woke up at the dead of night or early morning just to be part of this. It is something we enjoy, and we have a lot of insights and thoughts and comments and opinions, simply because we find it fascinating, and we both have industry experience from working on the publisher side as well. So if you're just looking for someone to bounce ideas off, reach out. Always a pleasure. Just not too early or too late.
You know what? Fair enough. And yeah, look, if Carl dragging himself out of bed at 6 a.m. isn't indicative of his passion, I don't know what is. And look, if you have any further suggestions, as in if you, the viewers, have any further suggestions for any future webinars, please let us know. We're always very happy to liaise with our friends at VGI to come back and, maybe run something with some more specialized or focused insights. So by all means, please reach out. There was one more question in the chat here. Chess was asking, do you share any of these trends, insights publicly? Can they be found online? Yes, you do find these in the Indie Games Market Report, and I would also encourage you to check their website on a very regular basis, given that there are some articles that they publish that summarize some of these things. Look, Vic, Carl, thank you so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. Like I said, getting up early, dragging yourself out of bed. And look, the same goes for you, Vic. It isn't exactly late where you're based. So thank you so much. And if anyone has any further questions, thoughts, or comments, please reach out to me or the VGI team. And again, we're more than happy to do this again. Until then, have a great day, have a great morning, have a great evening, wherever you are. And thank you so much for coming along.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.